Help me reach 1,000 subscribes. Support the video with a like and leave your thoughts in the comments. I read every comment. Thanks. I never thought an anniversary could feel like a battlefield. 18 years, 18 birthdays, 18 memories, and somehow, tonight, it felt like a war I didn't know I had signed up for. My name is Daniel, 45, and my wife, Rebecca, 43, had always been a charming, elegant type. Someone who could light up a room simply by walking into it. At least, that was the Rebecca I remembered from the first decade of our marriage. Over the last 8 years, the warmth had thinned, replaced by cold smirks and quiet resentment. But tonight, I'd remind us both why we fell in love. I didn't realize I was walking straight into her trap. We arrived at the Laurel Room, our favorite restaurant for anniversaries. Crystal chandeliers shimmered overhead, the gentle clink of glasses punctuating the low hum of conversations. I held Rebecca's hand, though she barely responded. Her smile was there, faint, practiced, like a photograph pasted onto a stranger's face. I had booked a private table, requested the chef to prepare her favorite dishes, and even brought a small gift, a delicate bracelet I had spent weeks selecting. My heart was racing with anticipation, a mixture of excitement and nervousness. I wanted to fix the distance between us, even if it had been months since we last truly connected. As we were seated, she ordered a cocktail I hadn't tasted before, a reddish drink that glistened under the warm lights. I watched her pour herself a sip, then noticed me staring. Her eyes flicked up, and I caught a flash. Something I couldn't name, a tiny smirk that didn't belong to Rebecca of my memories. My gut twisted. I raised my glass for a toast. To us, I said, genuinely smiling, trying to pull the old warmth back into our conversation. She clinked her glass lightly, and for a second, the world felt normal. Then she excused herself, leaving her drink behind, claiming she needed the restroom. I stared at the glass for a long moment. The way it caught the light, how innocuous it looked, made the pit in my stomach deepen. Something felt off. Years of subtle betrayals, half smiles hiding disdain, whispered arguments at night. I realized I had been ignoring them for far too long. That tiny smirk in the restaurant, the way she had stared at me the first time I looked at her tonight, suddenly made sense. She had planned this. She wanted to humiliate me. Maybe it was petty revenge. Maybe it was something I would never understand. But she had spiked her drink with something. My mind raced. I knew her well enough to sense it, and instinctively I reached for my own glass, unopened, and swapped them. The small action felt like tipping a scale I had long feared to balance. I didn't know what would happen if I was wrong, but I had made a decision. If she wanted to play games, I could too. The thought of what she had planned, of the control she sought, fueled something in me I hadn't felt in years. Daniel, stop thinking like a fool, I whispered to myself, but the adrenaline was sharp, intoxicating. When she returned, she smiled again, that rehearsed charm, and leaned across the table. I'm starving, she said lightly, but her eyes glinted differently now, as if she was already imagining what her plan would do. I poured her a sip from the swapped glass, making sure every movement seemed casual, deliberate. She didn't notice, or if she did, she masked it perfectly. The dinner progressed with polite conversation, stories about our kids, our work, distant laughter, and shared memories. But underneath the polite veneer, a silent tension crackled, electric, almost visible. Every time she lifted a glass, I felt the thrill of anticipation, the subtle terror of what might happen. I reminded myself that I wasn't cruel. I wasn't doing this to hurt her physically. I was reclaiming a little of the dignity she had stripped from our relationship over the years. As dessert arrived, a decadent chocolate tart with a drizzle of raspberry coulis. I noticed her hands tremble ever so slightly. Her smile, though perfect, seemed brittle. I wondered if she knew, even subconsciously, that her plan had already been countered. The thought made my pulse race. I had spent 18 years being careful, loyal, trying to mend what had slowly decayed between us. And tonight, finally, I had the upper hand. Then came the moment of truth. She reached for her glass, lifting it to her lips, and I caught her eye. There was a spark of something there. Fear, curiosity, perhaps recognition. I didn't flinch. I met it calmly, a quiet defiance in my gaze. I was no longer the man who would tolerate silent manipulation. No, tonight I had chosen a different path, one where I was no longer invisible, no longer passive. By the time we left the restaurant, the tension had become almost unbearable. The drive home was silent, charged, both of us aware of the invisible battle that had begun and would not end tonight. When we walked to the front door, I felt a strange satisfaction, like stepping into a new territory where the rules were mine to define. Little did Rebecca know, the night had only just begun. The game she had planned, the humiliation she had intended, was now hers to face, but I had the deck stacked in my favor. I only hoped she realized it before it was too late. The moment we stepped inside our home, I could feel the air shift. Rebecca went straight to the kitchen, humming a tune that sounded too sweet, too practiced. I followed, keeping my distance, letting her think she was still in control. I set down my coat, took a deep breath, and watched her reach for what she thought was her drink, the one I had carefully swapped. She raised it to her lips, and I saw the hesitation flicker in her eyes. That split-second pause told me she had felt a subtle difference. She froze mid-sip, then forced a laugh, like nothing had happened. But I knew. The satisfaction of finally turning the tables coursed through me quietly, a slow burn rather than an explosive thrill. I didn't need to yell, didn't need to make a scene. This was subtle, psychological, perfect. We sat in the living room, side by side, our anniversary music playing softly from the speaker. She tried small talk, but her sentences felt clipped, strained. The elegance of her plan had been exposed, and now she was scrambling for control. I could see the gears turning behind her eyes. "You look tired," I said casually, my voice even measured. It was a simple line, but the weight behind it was unmistakable. "I know what you did, and I'm not afraid." Rebecca shifted uncomfortably. "It's nothing," she replied, her voice a notch too high, the calm mask cracking. I leaned back, pretending to sip my own drink, all the while savoring the subtle victory of our silent duel. She kept glancing at her glass, as if suspecting something. I let her stew in that uncertainty, the invisible power dynamic tilting in my favor. "Do you want to tell me what you put in there?" I asked lightly, almost teasing. My words were casual, but they carried a sharp edge. Her eyes widened for a fraction of a second, and I caught the faintest twitch of panic at the corner of her mouth. She opened her mouth, closed it again. I smiled softly. "It's okay. You don't have to say anything." I continued. The silence stretched, heavy, almost unbearable. For years, she had toyed with my patience, with my trust. I had swallowed countless humiliations, the subtle barbs, the dismissive gestures. Tonight, I reclaimed something that had long been mine. And now, she realized the tables had turned. The knowledge that her plan could fail, and was like a slow knife twisting in her composure. The evening continued with a strange tension, neither of us speaking much. When she finally excused herself to the bedroom, I followed after a moment, pretending disinterest. That's when I saw the evidence, her little notebook hidden under the pillow, scribbled with instructions, timings, and ingredients. She had planned everything meticulously. The realization made me shiver, not with fear, but with a surge of power. I knew she expected embarrassment, maybe even a fight. What she hadn't counted on was my quiet calculation, my awareness, my patience. I didn't confront her immediately. Instead, I let her think she had won. I poured myself a glass of water, sat on the couch, and watched. Moments later, she came out, hesitated in the hallway, and our eyes met. There was something there, resentment, surprise, even a flicker of respect, though she would never admit it. I stood, walked over to the kitchen, and quietly disposed of the swapped drink. The thrill wasn't in harming her. It was in asserting control, reclaiming dignity, and finally leveling the emotional playing field. "What's wrong?" she asked, a weak attempt at normalcy. I shrugged, smiling faintly, almost apologetically. "Nothing," I said, "just enjoying the anniversary." The irony wasn't lost on either of us. I had survived her little scheme, and now, for the first time in years, I felt untouchable in a strange, quiet way. The night wore on, and the adrenaline slowly faded, replaced by a strange calm. I realized something. Our marriage had long been a battlefield, but the war I had feared was over, not because I won in a conventional sense, but because I refused to play by her rules anymore. I had acted not out of cruelty, but out of self-preservation, reclaiming the respect and authority I had quietly surrendered over the years. By the time the clock struck midnight, our anniversary was technically over, but something had shifted permanently. Rebecca sat across from me, smaller somehow, less composed, while I felt the steady beat of my own control. I had survived her plan, outmaneuvered it, and in doing so, reminded myself and her that manipulation could no longer dictate our lives. The next morning, I woke early. Rebecca was still asleep, the house silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. I poured coffee for both of us, placed her cup on the table without a word. She stirred, looked at me, confusion flickering in her eyes. I simply smiled and returned to my seat, sipping my coffee. The power had shifted subtly but irreversibly. She understood, even without words, that the dynamic had changed forever. Weeks later, the incident became a silent memory between us. She never mentioned the drink. I never mentioned the swap. But the balance had shifted, and with it, something fundamental in our relationship had been rewritten. I didn't feel triumphant or vindictive. I felt alive, aware, and finally untethered from the slow erosion of trust and respect that had haunted us for years. 18 years of marriage, countless anniversaries, and one deceptively simple act had changed everything. I had survived a betrayal, and in doing so, discovered something far more valuable than revenge: clarity, strength, and the knowledge that I would never again allow someone to undermine my worth, even on a night meant for celebration. And in that quiet revelation, the most shocking truth settled over me. The woman I thought I knew, the woman who had spiked my drink, had unwittingly reminded me of who I really was, and who I had allowed myself to become. And that realization was far more intoxicating than any cocktail ever could be.